Live September 13th from Las Vegas, Canelo Alvarez will defend his undisputed super middleweight championship against two-time undisputed 4-division world champion Terence "Bud" Crawford. It will be taking place at Allegiant Stadium, live on Netflix. Now, it's crazy to say that this fight is actually happening, because if you were to tell me 7-8 years ago that Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford would be fighting on a football stadium on Netflix, I would say you're crazy. Honestly, it's a sign of the times, man. I'm going to pretty much put everything on the table. There's intangibles involved, and, I'm going to break it down, preview, and when all is said and done, I'm going to give you my pick of who I think is going to win this fight. So Canelo Alvarez is clearly the experienced super middleweight in this equation. He started his career at welterweight, got titles all the way up to light heavyweight, but for the better part of 4 years, he's been a super middleweight. Not the biggest super middleweight, I should say, but when you consider, Canelo Alvarez is a high-level fighter, and he's one of these guys that's been able to move up in weight and still be successful. Now, Terence Crawford started his career at 135 pounds, and really his coming out party, so to speak, was his win over Yorkie's Gamboa. And from that point, he's grabbed titles at 140 pounds, became undisputed there, went to welterweight, where I feel he had the biggest run, where all of his fights there ended in knockout against guys like Kell Brook, Shawn Porter, and ultimately his mega fight with Errol Spence, which was a domination. Between both guys, Canelo Alvarez, ironically enough, he's been the more active fighter, as he's been fighting twice a year for practically his entire career. And Terence Crawford, in the last 3 to 4 years, has maybe fought once a year. Now, Canelo Alvarez clearly has the better resume. I mean, there's so many names to go through between Floyd Mayweather, Miguel Cotto, Gennady Golovkin, Dmitry Bivol, Sergey Kovalev. The list goes on and on and on, and he's going to be a short shot Hall of Famer when all is said and done. Terence Crawford, unfortunately, at this stage of the game is almost kind of playing catch up, because during his tenure with Top Rank, they couldn't land fights with him with the guys over at the PBC, with the exception, like I said, of Shawn Porter and ultimately Errol Spence. But when you consider guys like a Danny Garcia, that would have been a notch on Crawford's resume. Keith Thurman at the time, which would have been another notch. Again, not to get into the political side of things, but Terence Crawford, unfortunately, was at the brunt of the political, map, I should say, that boxing kind of turned into in the past 10 years. At this point, in recent years, the guy that came closest to beating him was his last fight, which was his first fight at 154 pounds against Israel Madrimov, who early on was a difficult task for Crawford. I mean, he's a very awkward fighter, very busy, throws shots from these odd angles, but down the stretch, Terence Crawford made some adjustments, and then as the fight was culminating, you kind of saw the wear and tear, and Crawford really putting a beating on Israel Madrimov. Contrary, I guess, to some people believing that Madrimov won that fight. Now, as of recent with Canelo Alvarez, there's a question as to the level of opposition he's faced since his loss to Dmitry Bivol, where, he went on to fight a 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin. He fights a Jermell Charlo, who took a fight kind of like late notice, being that Jermell Charlo was supposed to get the fight. And, considering he was going through stuff outside the ring, his brothers stepped in, but he had to put on a lot of weight within a 2-month span. And it didn't seem like there was any strategy for Jermell Charlo going into that fight. He fights a Jaime Munguia, he fights a Edgar Berlanga, and he's just coming off of this fight with William Skull, which, quite honestly, man, is probably the most uneventful Canelo fight, personally, I've ever seen. Now, some would argue that he wasn't cutting off the ring, he wasn't very busy, he wasn't really making an effort to close the show or to show overall dominance. Interestingly enough, Canelo hasn't had a knockout in about 6 fights. He's still managed to drop guys like a Edgar Berlanga, like a Jaime Munguia, like a Jermell Charlo, but the majority stock of those guys aren't really at the level that we would normally see Canelo Alvarez be in the ring with. So there is really a question mark as to whether or not Canelo Alvarez is starting to kind of slide a little bit based on the opposition he's faced that is probably making him look better than what his current form really is. Now, Terence Crawford moving up to 168 pounds naturally is a concern for a lot of people who've been watching boxing for quite a while, because, I mean, for him to leap from 154 pounds to 168 is a hell of a task. From my recollection, I don't think anybody in recent years has made that kind of leap and be successful. Terence Crawford is trying to do that. We've noticeably seen him get bigger within the last calendar year. We've been seeing him train now, and he visibly looks bigger than what he was when he was facing Madrimov or Errol Spence. Now the question comes to whether or not Crawford's speed, the twitch muscles, like they say, the power, and being able to do what he does with added muscle. That's always the question mark when you have fighters that move up in weight, particularly when you're somebody like Terence Crawford, who does have an array of tools in the bag. Now, the way many people are looking at this fight for the case of Canelo is he's just being seen as the bigger, stronger guy, and that he's going to withstand much of Crawford's, counterpunching ability and the speed, and just down the stretch, Canelo's just going to wear him out and just land body shots and arm punches and head punches, and then either have Crawford running, as I've been hearing, and or like what some have said, that Crawford's going to ultimately succumb to Canelo Alvarez. Terence Crawford is somebody that has shown the ability to adapt mid-fight. When people make the comparison about like Floyd, look what Floyd did to Canelo, so imagine what Bud's going to do. I don't think it's going to be a mirror of that fight, only because Terence Crawford and Floyd Mayweather don't fight alike. I'll tell you what they have a similarity in. They see the mirage, okay? And what is the mirage? They see things well ahead before they become present, and that's one of the skill sets. And I'd even argue, I mean, this is potentially, as they say, God-given for Terence Crawford, where he's just able to see things quicker than most fighters do. And this is where he has a lot of success. And let alone, you don't know if he's going to come in orthodox, if he's going to come in southpaw. He's a very difficult guy to prepare for, let alone try to beat. Now, with Canelo Alvarez, while he has gotten titles, in like four different weight classes, we have seen remedies on how to beat Canelo Alvarez. Even as of recent, his fight with Dimitri Bivol, granted, Bivol was the bigger guy, but when you really look at that fight, Bivol beat him with fundamental boxing. He was a busy fighter. He had better feet. He was able to get out of range. He had a longer reach than Canelo. And every time Canelo tried to open up, Bivol kind of had like 2-3 more punches coming at him, and Canelo showed a lot of frustration in that fight. Now, while Terence Crawford and Dimitri Bivol don't fight alike, Terence Crawford does have better feet. He does have a longer reach. He does command range really well. He's a great counterpuncher, and Teddy Atlas made mention of this, and I agree 1,000%, is that he's a very instinctful fighter. He does things in the ring that you really can't train. You either have it or you don't. When I see these two guys, right, I have to look at their current form. And I think Crawford at 38 years old, as crazy as it sounds, I think is in better condition than Canelo Alvarez is, because what you got to remember with Canelo Alvarez is that he's almost 70 fights in, okay? He started as a pro at 15 and hasn't stopped. So while he hasn't been, being in wars is subjective, because, you can argue he had two arguably 3 difficult fights against Gennady Golovkin, but he hasn't been somebody who's been hurt or stopped or anything like that. but you have to think about the wheels, okay? And I always bring up the correlation of the 2009 Ferrari that cosmetically looks great on the outside, but when you lift up the hood, it's got like 250,000 miles under the hood. So for somebody like Terence Crawford at 38 years old, he has less wear and tear, but he's also ultimately a better conditioned fighter. I mean, Terence Crawford is somebody that I feel can fight in the 15-round era. We've seen Canelo Alvarez, even as of late, kind of get winded in fights, and in a situation like that against Terence Crawford, it's what I talk about the mirage. He's going to be able to see those things. I just think with Canelo Alvarez, as of late, the guy at middleweight is not the guy at super middleweight, where he was a little quicker on his feet, he was quicker to the punch, he was a little more active, he threw a jab. There were just assets that I feel would pose much more difficulty to Terence Crawford than what I feel, honestly, he's going to see in September. Now, when I mesh this together, and mind you, man, I have gone through every possible scenario for this fight, you know, how it could ultimately play out. But the more I look at it and the more things I put on the table, when I talk about who's the better boxer, who's the better counterpuncher, who has better feet, who has better conditioning, who has less wear and tear, okay, who wants it more, okay? Everything just is seemingly pointing to Terence Crawford. The big question mark is whether or not he can take a solid punch from Canelo Alvarez. But if he's able to do that, as this fight presses on into the later rounds, I personally feel Canelo is going to have difficulty with Terence Crawford, and with how Terence Crawford, I feel, is going to approach this fight. I think Crawford is going to attack Canelo's body, and not so much of the liver shots, but solar plexus. And Dimitri Bivol did some of this too, like straight jabs to the solar plexus. And I think with Terence Crawford, it's going to be kind of a scenario where it's going to be little by little by little, like chopping that big tree down. And as the fight presses on, and being as Canelo has never really been the best conditioned guy, I think that spells danger in rounds 8, 9, and 10 facing Terence Crawford. So while Terence Crawford is the guy moving up in weight, and we always hear the scenario, big man beats great big man beats great little man, I really feel this is a situation that the guy moving up is just an overall better fighter than the bigger guy. So for my pick, I have to go with Terence Crawford in this fight, and I honestly believe he's going to have a masterclass performance. I just think Canelo Alvarez at this stage, we've seen the best of him. He's slower on his feet. He's not throwing as many punches. He loads up a lot. He's swinging wide with his hooks, and stuff like that Terence Crawford is going to eat up. And I don't think he's going to knock Canelo Alvarez out, but if it's a situation that in rounds 9, 10, and 11 that when I'm mentioning the body shots and, you know, punches to the solar plexus, and Canelo's starting to bring his hands down, that real estate up here is going to be wide open for Terence Crawford to be landing more consistently than perhaps earlier in the fight. So again, for my pick, I got Terence Crawford by unanimous decision. You know, I know there's gonna be kickback to this, but this is the whole point, man. We debate, we have our opinions, but this is just the way I see the fight. If Canelo goes in there and stops Terence Crawford or outboxes Terence Crawford, you gotta tip your hat to Canelo Alvarez equally. You know, it's really a big fight for both guys. I just think Terence Crawford right now, he's the hungrier fighter, and I just think he's the overall better boxer. So let me know in the comment section who you got winning this fight. September 13th, live, Allegiant Stadium on Netflix. Canelo Alvarez, Terence Bud Crawford. So if you haven't already, hit the notification button, like, subscribe, all that, and I'll be back soon. Peace.